Zack Snyder's Watchmen is often called one of the most faithful comic adaptations ever made, but Snyder completely missed the point, because looking like Watchmen isn't the same as understanding it. In the world of comic books, Watchmen is one of the most impactful stories ever published. For years, Hollywood tried to turn it into a movie. To understand why Snyder's films misses the point, we need to understand what Watchmen is. Watchmen was written by Alan Moore and illustrated by Dave Gibbons, originally developed from characters DC had acquired from Charlton Comics. Published as a 12-issue series from 1986 to 1987, Watchmen quickly became one of the most important comic books ever created. In 2005, Time magazine included it on its list of the 100 greatest English-language novels published since 1923, the only graphic novel to make the list. That alone tells you something important. This isn't a typical superhero story. Set against the backdrop of Cold War paranoia, the story takes place in an alternate 1985 where superheroes have altered history, leading to a U.S. victory in Vietnam and the world on the brink of nuclear war. But Watchmen isn't about heroes saving the day. It's a deconstruction of the genre, a story that asks a simple and uncomfortable question. What if superheroes actually made the world worse? Understanding that idea is the key to understanding Watchmen. After Watchmen became a success, Hollywood quickly took interest. For years, no one could quite figure out how to adapt it, or if it should be adapted at all. Directors came and went, and even early casting ideas, including Arnold Schwarzenegger as Dr. Manhattan, reflected how uncertain anyone was about how to bring the story to the screen. That finally changed in 2006, when Zack Snyder was hired by Warner Brothers. The film went into production in 2007 and was released in 2009. I'll admit, when I first heard about the Watchmen film and saw the commercials, I was excited. My wife and I were at the theater on opening night, but when the credits rolled, I had a very different reaction. What I watched that night wasn't Watchmen. It looked like Watchmen, same characters, same plot, but it completely missed what the story was really about. Snyder chose style over substance, creating an underlit, hyper-stylized film that suggests he fully didn't understand the source material. Watchmen is like an onion. Every time you read it, you discover another layer. One of the central ideas of the story is that costume heroes are just as flawed, and often just as dangerous as everyone else. That is the point Snyder completely missed. Some people argue that Snyder adapted Watchmen perfectly because many scenes that were recreated panel for panel from the comics. Well, that's true. There are moments in the film that look like as though they were lifted from Dave Gibbons' artwork. But if that's your only takeaway, then you completely miss the point of Watchmen. Even the director's cut doesn't change that. It adds more scenes, but it doesn't change how the film understands the story. Take the attempted rape of the first Silk Spectre by the comedian. Snyder immediately changes the tone of the story. In the film, the moment is staged as an extremely brutal assault, with the comedian laughing maniacally throughout. It almost plays as a horror sequence. In the comic, the scene is still disturbing, but is handled differently. The comedian isn't laughing. Instead, the focus on his abuse of power, a man who believes the rules don't apply to him, using heroism as an excuse to dominate others. Moore wrote the comedian as a symbol of cynical authority, someone who understands how ugly the world is and embraces it. Snyder turns him into something closer to a cartoon villain. And that misunderstanding of tone doesn't stop there. Rorschach is another example how Snyder misunderstands the material. In the comic, Rorschach is not meant to be admired. He's racist, misogynistic, and psychologically broken. Moore wrote him as a deeply disturbed man whose rigid black and white worldview makes him dangerous. But in Snyder's film, Rorschach is framed very differently. He's represented as a badass anti-hero, almost Batman-like. The one character who refuses to compromise. The camera lingers on his brutality and his fiction, inviting the audience to admire him rather than question him. Moore didn't create Rorschach to be a hero. He created him as a warning. Nowhere is that difference clearer than in the prison scenes. In the comic, Rorschach isn't triumphant. He's exposed. Without the mask, he's stripped of the one thing that defines him. The mask isn't just a disguise, it's his identity. Without it, all that remains is Walter Kovac, broken man, sitting silently in the cell. Even his voice reflects that. The bravado is gone, what left is flat, almost emotionless. But in Snyder's film, that moment is treated like the rise of a dark hero. And then there's the murder of the comedian. In the comic, when Ozymandias attacks him, the moment is surprisingly brief. The comedian is caught off guard and barely puts up a fight. It's almost as he feels though he accepts what's happening. In Snyder's film, however, the moment that barely takes a minute on the page is stretched into a long, drawn-out fight sequence. Two characters smashing through walls and furniture in a fight that looks something from a traditional superhero movie. In the comic, the comedian's death feels inevitable, almost final consequences of a lifetime of brutality. In the film, it just becomes another spectacle of violence. Another example comes during the confrontation between Ozymandias' Antarctic hideout between Rorschach and Night Owl. In the comic, the scene is quick, subtle, and surprisingly powerful. It only occupies a few panels. In the film, however, Snyder once again stretches the moment into a full-scale fight. Characters are thrown around like superhumans, pushing the scene far beyond anything believable. There was no reason for this change. Sometimes less is more. It's as if Snyder saw people in costumes and assumed the story should be filmed like a traditional superhero movie. The most common complaint I hear, even from people who like the Snyder film, is the removal of the giant squid. In the comic, Ozymandias stages a fake alien invasion in New York City to unite the world against a common extraterrestrial threat. In the film, Snyder replaces the alien with Dr. Manhattan, framing him as the cause of destruction instead. While I wish the film did keep the squid, the change still works. It achieves the same goal, giving the world a shared enemy powerful enough to stop the Cold War. But when this is the only complaint people raise, I have to wonder if they've actually read the book, or if they've just been looking at the pretty pictures. Because the real issue with Snyder's Watchmen was never the squid. The real problem is that the film understands the image of Watchmen, but not the ideals behind them. Simply put, this is a terrible adaptation of the source material. This is not Watchmen. That raises the question, can Watchmen even be adapted for the screen? For years, many fans believed the answer was no. The story is too dense, too layered, and too dependent on the unique structure of the comic itself. But it turns out the answer is yes. In 2024, Warner Home Entertainment released a two-part animated adaptation of Watchmen, directed by Brian Vetti and written by J. Michael Sturinsky. Unlike Snyder's version, this one stays much closer to the original comic. It not only fully adapts the main story, it even incorporates the tales of the Black Freighter. For the first time, a version of Watchmen that reflects the structure and themes of the comic reached the screen. If you want to see a Watchmen adapted properly, watch the two-part animated film. Zack Snyder may have recreated the images of Watchmen, but he never understood what the story was about. And if you still think this movie is a faithful adaptation, you might want to go back and read the book again.